All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's virtual presentation of Miracle on Bancroft Street, which is presented by our special guest this evening, Barbara Floyd, and sponsored by the UToledo Alumni Association. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Smith. I'm a Director of Alumni Engagement with the University of Toledo, and I'll be your host for tonight's event. As guests are joining us, I would like to share a few housekeeping notes about our virtual event this evening. First off, attendee names are not visible to other attendees. They are only visible to hosts and presenters. Therefore, you will only see your name in the attendee list. Rest assured, we're expecting several hundred attendees for this evening, so there are more there than just the one you see in the attendee list. Additionally, if you'd like to change the view on your screen, you can click on the upper right-hand corner of your screen to expand or reduce. To preserve bandwidth for all of us that are attending here tonight and allow for the ultimate viewing experience, all attendee mics are muted and cameras are turned off. Also, questions, we would like to hear from you, so questions can be submitted throughout the presentation in the chat box in the bottom of the screen. As you will see, that it will say that it's going to the host, which is myself. I'll be collecting these questions throughout the event, and I will ask as many as possible during the question and answer portion of this event at the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to officially and virtually welcome our first guest, Billy Pierce, Associate Vice President of Alumni Engagement for the University of Toledo, who provides some words of welcome and introduction. Billy?
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate the introduction. And thank all of you for giving up of your time this evening to join us in this kickoff to our celebration of our 100-year anniversary of the Alumni Association. It's certainly an exciting time. We wish we could all be together, but one of the things that the pandemic has allowed us to do is explore some virtual formats such as this, which has allowed us to really expand our audience. And we've got people from all over the country that have joined in. We've got one person that is from Venezuela that has registered to join us tonight. And so this platform has allowed us to really reach more of our alumni. We have 168,000 plus living alumni around the world, just under 800 lifetime members of the Alumni Association. And so we're really excited to celebrate this time with all of you. And there'll be more events to come over the coming months as we celebrate throughout the year. And we're optimistic that at some point we can get together and celebrate this momentous occasion. But we felt it would be important for us to start with talking about the history of our alma mater. We would not have an alumni association if it weren't for the University of Toledo. And so when we reached out to Barbara Floyd, I was so excited to hear that she accepted and agreed to walk us through this exciting presentation tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce her to you. She holds 3 different degrees from our university. She served as the University of Toledo's archivist for more than 30 years. She was the former director of the Ward M. Canaday Center for Special Collections. She's authored 6 books about the history of Toledo and the university, and is currently writing a book that highlights the university's 150-year history, and it's scheduled to be released in 2022. And so please join me virtually and welcome our featured speaker tonight, Barbara Floyd.
Thank you, Billy. Can you hear me? I hope everyone can hear me. Okay. Well, thank you, Billy, for that kind introduction. I'm excited this evening to be talking to a group of my fellow alums on a topic that I find fascinating, which is the history of our University of Toledo. As Billy mentioned, I'm currently in the process of researching and writing an extensive scholarly history on the university, which will be published next year for our 150th anniversary. So there are a lot of important anniversaries upon us. We have the 100th anniversary of the Alumni Association, and next year the 150th anniversary of the university. As I've done my research for my book, I've been astounded by the many amazing stories in our university's history, and tonight I'm going to tell you about one of them. The first 60 years of the University of Toledo and all of the many obstacles that had to be overcome before the institution settled into its permanent home on Bancroft Street. It's a tale of dreams, of legal fights, of budgetary constraints, of fire, of political infighting, of war, of severe economic depression, and even has an elephant thrown in for good measure. So let me bring up my At this point, Scott's career moved to, I'm going to go back. At this point, Scott's career moved to writing and publishing. In 1844, he briefly became publisher of the Toledo Blade, and he also began writing articles for magazines about the Midwest on subjects ranging from trade to the growth of railroads and canals in the region. And in 1847, he would publish his first article promoting the advantages of the city of Toledo. At the time, Jessup Scott was publishing articles in national business magazines promoting Toledo as a place with natural attributes that would someday make it the largest city in the world. The reality was really quite different. Toledo was in many ways a case of arrested development. Reasons Toledo was late to be founded included, among other things, threats from the Native Americans who rightly claimed the region up until the end of the War of 1812, as well as aspects of the geography that were obstacles to growth rather than the advantages Scott spoke of so frequently. In 1817, land speculators plotted the first town called Port Lawrence on the banks of the Maumee River in what is today part of downtown Toledo. But few settlers came, and the development of Port Lawrence failed, and the speculators who had invested there defaulted loans. Not much else happened in the region until 1825, when the Ohio Canal Commissioners issued plans showing a statewide system of canals that would link Ohio with the Erie Canal to the east and the Ohio River to the south. A proposed terminus for the canal was to be located in northwest Ohio, and this created a real estate boom as speculators tried to figure out where the canal would be located and purchase that land. In 1832, a second Port Lawrence was established as part of this boom, and as was a rival settlement called Vistula. As the plans for the canal terminus were being finalized, the two rivals decided to merge together to better their chances to become the location for this transportation link. The settlements of Lawrence and Vistula formally merged and were incorporated to the city of Toledo in 1837. And on these two maps, you can see Port Lawrence is that area on the left, and Vistula is that area on the right, and there's this area in between. A few years before Port Lawrence and Vistula merged to create Toledo, Jessup Scott purchased the land between the two settlements, and he made a wise investment. So that area that is not part of either of those settlements is what Jessup Scott owned. The original 70-acre tract that would become much of downtown Toledo became the basis for much of his wealth. But there were still problems that kept the new city of Toledo from becoming prosperous. The land was flat, had heavy clay soil, and it made drainage difficult. Lake Erie was also shallow at the western end, and this contributed to the poor conditions. All of this led to frequent outbreaks of deadly diseases, and Toledo quickly became known as the graveyard of the Midwest. Outbreaks of malaria and cholera were frequent, with major epidemics of cholera in 1849, 1852, and 1854. Despite these difficulties, Jessup Scott continued to be one of the most vocal promoters of the settlement of the Toledo area. He claimed that the region's natural advantages had far outweighed the negatives, and that these natural advantages would eventually make the region the most populous and economically successful in the country. In 1868, Scott published a small pamphlet that represented the culmination of his thinking about the region, which he titled A Presentation of Causes Tending to Fix the Position of the Future Great City of the World. Scott began by affirming his belief that the development and growth of cities was rooted in natural law. But not all cities were equal, and Scott proposed that one city would become the greatest, and that city was Toledo. Scott predicted that in 100 years, the United States would have a population of 40 million, that New York would be 2/3 the size of Toledo, and that Toledo's population would have increased 30-fold. 4 years after publishing his essay proclaiming Toledo would be the future great city of the world, in 1872, Scott donated 160 acres of land as an endowment for a university in the city that he thought would help propel it to its greatness. The university created in October 1872 by Scott was called Toledo University of Arts and Trades. There was a sense in 1872 that the city was indeed on some sort of threshold of greatness, and Scott's endowment of a university was both proof of and an ingredient for that greatness. The 160 acres of land that Scott donated was not located downtown or where the university is located today. Rather, it was located adjacent to the intersection of two branches of the Lakeshore Railroad and next to what was planned to be one of the largest railroad terminals in the Midwest. You may know this land today at the Scott Park campus. The land was expected to increase in value as the railroad terminal was completed. The land was not only to serve as the location for the university, but leases of the land near the university would raise enough money to provide the operating funds for it. Fundamental to Scott's proposed university was its emphasis on practical education. Such education would be essential as Toledo's growth expanded and new industries utilizing the latest technologies were created. Toledo moved toward, because of the railroad terminal that was supposed to make Scott's donation of land valuable enough to support a university was not yet built, the trustees decided to find another location so the university could move forward. With the help of a donor, they purchased a half-finished church building in downtown Toledo and renovated it so that it could be used for classes. Once the railroad terminal was completed, the intention of the trustees was to build the permanent university on Scott's donated land. But unfortunately, the land donated by Jessup Scott proved inadequate to support the university, especially after the Panic of 1873, the worst economic downturn of the 19th century. The railroad terminal that was supposed to be built near the Scott land never materialized, and the value of the land sharply declined. Without the possibilities of leases from land around the terminal, the prospects for the Toledo University of Arts and Trades fell quickly. In 1874, Jessup Scott died, never having seen his university open. With its benefactor now deceased, it was uncertain how to move forward. The trustees, Macomber, made a bold suggestion for funding the institution. Give it to the city of Toledo so it could become a municipal university. On April 4th, 1874, the trustees invited the city to take over the Scott Trust, but the city rejected the donation. The Panic of 1873 had left city coffers dry, and Toledo had a debt of $2 million due to building railroads, bridges, and new waterworks. The university was seen as an unnecessary. It was a devastating blow to the struggling institution. Despite the setback, the trustees moved forward to try to open the university and offer some classes. But from the beginning, the university was significantly smaller in scope and different in focus than originally envisioned. It's only had one program, which was a school of design. The only courses offered were freehand, architectural, and mechanical drawing. The first classes were held on February 4th, 1875. But as you can imagine, the institution struggled. By 1878, it was clear it could not survive, and the school suspended classes that year, and the Toledo University of Arts and Trades was defunct for the next 6 years. In 1884, the sons of Jessup Scott and other trustees of the university finally succeeded in doing what they had tried to do 10 years before. On January 18th of that year, they proposed again to the Toledo City Council that the entire property included in the trust be deeded to the city of Toledo. This time, the city accepted the offer, and the trustees made plans to reopen as a municipally supported institution, which it would remain until 1967. But the reconstituted institution that was established by the Board of Directors in 1884, when the assets of the Toledo University of Arts and Trades was given to the city of Toledo, was actually not a university. The new school was called the Toledo Manual Training School, and it was aimed at training Toledo public high school students in a 3-year program beginning in the 8th grade. The school's curriculum was interesting in that it was divided equally between a traditional academic education and vocational training. The curriculum the first year included the usual arithmetic, algebra, English, history, geography, but it also included shop classes such as carpentry and wood carving, wood turning, pattern making, and the proper care and use of tools. The second and third years were similar, with vocational training becoming more advanced. The idea was not to train a student in any one vocation, but to expose them to a variety of manual skills, and by educating both the head with traditional subjects and the hands with practical skills, it was believed that the student would become well-rounded and be able to do any job or even continue their education at a university. Despite the extensive planning that went into the curriculum for the manual training school, the first order of business before it could become a reality was to find a location to hold classes. The Board of Education allowed the directors use of the upper 2 floors of the Toledo Central High School, which was located downtown. The success of the manual training school program soon led to overcrowding, and the directors raised $20,000 to construct a building dedicated to manual training as an annex to the Central High School building. One of the unique features of the original Articles of Incorporation for the Toledo University of Arts and Trades, as established in 1872, was that women were to be admitted on equal footing with men. However, the new manual training school excluded girls. Sarah Williams, one of the original trustees and the only woman on the board, took her concerns about this restriction to Toledo Women's Suffrage Association. The board protested that girls should have an equal opportunity to attend the school. So the board of directors voted in 1884 to allow both sexes to take manual training courses and appointed a committee to develop a curriculum that they felt was appropriate for girls. The program focused on domestic economy. The first year's curriculum was interesting in that it was similar to that of the boys and included training in the use of tools, sawing, wood carving, furniture finishing, etc. But after the first year, the curriculum was more traditional for women, including instruction in food preparation, home sanitation, the care of the sick, sewing, and gardening. So while proposed by suffragettes, the stated purpose of the educational program was in keeping with widely held views of womanhood that dominated American culture in the 19th century. The Toledo Manual Training School was so successful that it began to be emulated by other public school systems. The first class graduated in June 1888 and included 15 boys and 7 girls. But innocence of the Manual Training School laid the seeds of its demise. In 1899, tensions between the Toledo Board of Education and the Manual Training School's Board of Directors became heated. There was considerable overlap between the students in the high schools and the students in the manual training program, and the Board of Education began to exert more power over the school. New members of the Board of Directors sought to move the school's curriculum away from manual training and toward what they believed was in keeping with the original ordinance that established the school as Toledo University. On August 13, 1900, the Manual Training School's Board of Directors recommended the establishment of a new Toledo University that would offer a university-level curriculum. For 14 months, the proposal remained in limbo. The Board of Directors and the Board of Education sparred over the proposal and quickly became bitter enemies. One of the arguments against calling it Toledo University was that the school did not meet the definition of a university because it was not an organization of colleges as state law required. The directors sought to address this problem by working to merge Toledo University with another college located in the city, the Toledo Medical College. In 1904, the trustees of the Toledo Medical College drew up an agreement to merge with Toledo University and lease the medical college building to the university at a cost of $1,000 a year, giving the university some much space in the medical college's building to hold classes. But City Council, dominated by those opposed to the university, repeatedly refused to levy taxes to support Toledo University and continued to question its legality. A court fight also ensued between the Board of Directors and the Board of Education over who controlled the schools. As the legal case over who controlled Toledo University worked its way through the courts, the Board of Directors moved forward and in July 1909 appointed Jerome Raymond as the first president of Toledo University. Upon his appointment, Raymond created a College of Arts and Sciences, which joined the Colleges of Medicine, Pharmacy, and the YMCA's Law School, which had also become part of the university. The establishment of the College of Arts and Sciences was key to the university's legitimacy, as it was charged with providing general education to all university students. The fledgling university also hired some very impressive faculty to join President Raymond. Toledo University, as envisioned by its early leaders, was to be a university of people, with its primary function to serve the citizens of Toledo. But even after hiring a president and assembling a faculty, Toledo University's future was anything but certain. City Council continued to refuse to approve funds to operate it. In October 1909, City Council pledged only $2,400 to operate the university, the exact same amount it had approved to purchase an elephant for the Toledo Zoo. President Raymond tried to embarrass Council by pointing out this fact. "I do believe in elephants," Raymond said, "for without an elephant, whom else would the children feed their peanuts? But I also believe in a university, and it doesn't seem quite consistent that the two should be subscribed the same amount." Raymond got the $2,400 from Council, but no more. After a year, President Raymond had had enough and he resigned. Faculty who had not been paid for months followed suit. Then the already dire situation took a turn for the worse in January 1911, when a fire swept through the Toledo Medical College building where most of the university's classes were held. The fire destroyed the laboratory equipment, the books in the library, and many of the records of the university. With none of the resources required to operate it, the directors of Toledo University considered admitting failure and closing it. Fortunately, at the last minute, the directors were able to arrange to rent some space on the third floor of an office building downtown, known as the Meredith Building, and repairs were made to the medical college building using insurance money, and that's the Meredith Building in the background there of this particular photograph. In 1911, City Council allocated all of $5,000 of the university, which was enough to keep it operating. Even after the medical college building was repaired, many classes continued to be held in the Meredith Building, which was woefully inadequate. Without money for a new building, the board of directors began to look elsewhere for adequate facilities, and the unsettled nature of the institution made its future look very bleak. On January 24th, 1911, the directors finally received the news they had been waiting for over a decade when the Ohio Supreme Court upheld the legality of the university and its control by the board of directors rather than the Board of Education. Having won the battle, the Board of Directors and the Board of Education finally agreed to work together. The Board of Education was given the manual training school, which no longer fit with the university's curriculum, and Toledo University was given a vacant old elementary school building downtown at 11th and Illinois to hold classes. While it may have seemed like a reasonable solution at the time, the 11th and Illinois building was no bargain. It had not been occupied for years. The plumbing was shot, the roof leaked, and the foundation was crumbling. The school had been abandoned by the Board of Education because the area in which it was located was a high crime area. After renovations to make the building habitable, the university moved in December 1913. The building was much larger than any other facility that had housed the university to date, but it was still inadequate for a university, and it lacked a sense of permanence. Things, unfortunately, were not as positive for the Toledo Medical College. With no funds to improve the quality of education as was required by the American Medical Association, the university quietly closed the college in 1917, but continued to hold other classes in the college's building. In 1914, the board appointed A. Monroe Stowe as president of the Toledo University at the age of 32. During his 11-year tenure, Stowe would work towards creating a more mature university, focusing on admission requirements, degree requirements, and creating an effective organizational structure. Despite the optimism that began with the appointment of President Stowe, Toledo University still faced challenges, primarily among them the facilities that housed it. The location of the 11th and Illinois building remained a problem, and female students avoided walking alone in the high crime neighborhood. While the Toledo Medical College had closed, science classes were still held in that building, which was over a mile from the 11th and Illinois building, requiring students to trek between the two structures. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Toledo University stood ready to help by offering classes for the war effort. A new federal program called the Student Army Training Corps, in forerunner to today's ROTC, was instituted at the university, and about 150 men enrolled in July 1917. Women, too, were offered the courses to train them to take over some of the jobs held by men who left to fight in the war. Since World War I was the first war of the automobile era, One of the most interesting programs was started by the Red Cross to teach women the operation and repair of gasoline automobile engines. To house the soldiers in the Student Army Training Corps and to provide space for the automobile mechanics program, the City of Toledo began construction of 2 buildings on the original Jessup Scott land that had been donated back in 1872. These included a dormitory for students and a machine shop where it was hoped over 1,000 automobile mechanics could be trained. While the dormitory building was completed as planned, the machine shop was not finished before the war ended, when an armistice was proclaimed on November 11, 1918. At the conclusion of the war, the 2 buildings constructed on the Scott farm were no longer needed for their intended purposes. The largest of the 2 buildings was little more than a shell, and it lacked walls, woodwork, and heating. With the university desperate for space for its growing enrollment after the war, in April 1921, President Stowe asked the council for the money to finish the buildings, which was being called the Science Building, so it could house the engineering and science labs that had been located in the medical college. In addition, plans called for removing the 2nd floor of the dormitory that had been used to house the Student Army Training Corps and renovating that into a gymnasium. Most of the university's class moved into the renovated buildings on the Scott farm in the fall of 1922. But the new campus was far from perfect. First, it was not centrally located, and it was in the middle of a largely industrial area. There was no streetcar service to the campus, and it was close to railroad tracks, and crossing the tracks proved to be both difficult and dangerous for the students. And while the Science Building was certainly an upgrade from the downtown buildings, it was not designed to house a university, and it looked every bit the industrial building that it had been intended to be. Again, the university's future seemed tied to its inadequate facilities, and a sense of permanence still eluded the university. The board of directors seemed to agree that the Scott Farm campus was a temporary solution at best, and that the buildings did not inspire the students or the citizens of Toledo. Even before moving into the campus, the directors passed a resolution in the spring of 1922 that laid the groundwork for a hoped-for new campus sometime in the future that, contrary to the Scott Farm buildings, would look like a university. The board stated its philosophy that beautiful grounds and buildings were as important to education and culture as what students learned in the classroom, and charged its Building and Grounds Committee to study styles of architecture and possible locations for future buildings. The committee was to, quote, seek the best and most artistic of university architecture at the earliest time possible, with a view that the university will be an inspiration to the youth and a joy and pride to the coming and future generations of our municipality, unquote. In 1924, President Stowe began to have troubles both with students and faculty. Reduced support from the city required budget cuts of 15% and an increase in faculty teaching loads. He also had to increase student fees. The faculty became concerned that the university's budget cuts would be an excuse to fire them, and they publicly criticized Stowe. In March 1925, Stowe contended that there was an organization of faculty members working against him, and he turned in his resignation to the board of directors. To replace Stowe, the board of directors voted to appoint John W. Dowd to the position. But Dowd's tenure was short-lived as he became seriously ill in May 1926 and died that month of pneumonia. Following extensive search, the board of directors announced in October 1926 the hiring of Ernest Ashton Smith as the new president. In late December, Smith arrived on campus. He attended a few meetings and then left to spend the holidays with his family. On December 28th, it was announced he had died of a heart attack. In September 1927, Dr. Henry J. Dorman, Dean of Administration, Vice Chancellor, and Acting President of the University of Puerto Rico, was announced as the new president of the University of Toledo. Even before he arrived to begin his job in early 1928, it was clear to President Dorman that he would have to move quickly to find a new permanent home for the University of Toledo. To purchase the needed and to build a new permanent campus that would convey the future for the institution, President Dorman realized the money would have to come from a taxpayer-funded bond levy. If the money could be raised, the location selected for the campus would be critical. Derman said it was the needs of the city that would be the primary driver in deciding where the new university was located. Quote, "We must build a university which is to be permanent, one that will fill the needs of the city in 25 years as well as today," unquote. In April 1928, the board of directors said it wanted a bond levy to pay for the campus placed on the ballot that year. A special committee on relocation was charged with studying possible sites and making a recommendation. But quickly recognizing the political risks that went into choosing a site, the committee decided to delay any announcement of where the university would be located until after the vote of Toledoans on the bond levy, which was placed on the November ballot to raise $2.85 million, including $350,000 for purchasing land. The campaign for the bond levy was extensively planned. Students, faculty, alumni, and citizens divided up wards and precincts so that each voter in Toledo could be personally contacted for their support. And I'll make a note here that the Alumni Association was extremely important in this campaign. The campaign slogan made a direct connection between the university's future and the city's future. U of Toledo for U of Toledo. The university also sought endorsements from influential sectors of the community, and most comments focused on the demands placed on the university due to increasing enrollments, the relative cost of the bond levy to the individual taxpayer, and the potential impact a new campus could have on the future of the city itself. On the eve of the vote, Toledo's mayor appealed to the voters' sense of greater good. Quote, "Let us have a university which we can with pride send our children and to which we can look for educational leadership, a very essential attribute to a fast-growing metropolitan community. A vote for the university bond issue is a vote for more enlightened citizenry," unquote. The campaign continued right up through the election day, with students assigned to each polling place to hand out pamphlets supporting the levy to voters as they came to cast their ballots. The bond fortunately passed in November 1928 by 10,000 votes. Almost as quickly as the votes were counted, the issue of where the new campus would be located became fraught with conflict. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. One proposed site was downtown, with the university to be housed there in a high-rise building. Some, particularly those residing in the neighborhoods nearby, wanted the university to remain on the Scotland. The number of suggested locations quickly doubled from 19 to almost 40. At a meeting of the university trustees on January 4th, 1929, owners of 20 of the sites formally presented what they saw as their property's advantages to President Dorman, the mayor, and the board of directors. Among those presenting that day was the Reuben Realty Company, representing the owners of an 80-acre parcel known as the Rufus Baker Farm on West Bancroft Street, opposite the Old Orchard neighborhood. The natural attributes of the land were seen as particularly attractive for the new campus. Its gentle sloping hills, a creek that ran through the middle of it, and its location was adjacent to the new upscale residential development just then underway across Bancroft. While the directors favored this location, they decided to bring in an outside consultant to guide them to remove any allegations of impropriety from the selection process. Harold Bartholomew, a consultant from St. Louis, was hired to review the possible sites and make a recommendation. His report to the board of directors made it clear that the decision of where to locate the new campus was critical and had the ability to impact not only the university's future, but that of the city. His report began the nature of the entire development, its progress, its contributions to the city as a whole, in usefulness and beauty, now and for the future, will be determined largely by the success or failure of that choice. Bartholomew then carefully laid out the arguments for the Bancroft Street site. Considerations included how central the property would be to where potential students lived. The site also had to be of adequate size for the present and future needs of the university in one location, not scattered around the city as was then the case. Bartholomew said, other things being equal, the best possible neighbor would be either a large public park, an impressive public building group, or a quiet, high-class residential neighborhood. In addition to access, sufficient area, and companionable neighbors, it should also, if possible, offer many natural advantages in topography or special beauty in the property itself. The Bancroft Street site met Bartholomew's recommended requirements. The directors accepted his recommendation, paying $275,000 for the Baker farmland. But there was one more obstacle to overcome. The groundbreaking ceremony for the new campus was originally planned for November 1st, 1929. 2 days before the planned event, a day that became known as Black Tuesday, a crash in stock market prices on Wall Street wiped out billions of dollars from the U.S. economy, signaling the start of the worst economic depression of modern times. If there was a silver lining in this catastrophe, it was that the university directors had not waited to place the bond levy for the new campus on the November 1929 election ballot, when it likely would have failed and the future of the university would have been very uncertain. With the successful outcome of the bond levy campaign and the decision made on the site, planning for construction of the new campus on Bancroft Street moved quickly forward. The Toledo architectural firm of Mills, Rhines, Bellman, and Nordhoff was selected to design the first building, and a consultant on the project was the nationally known architect Charles Clowder of Philadelphia, who designed some of the most notable university campus buildings in the country that were built in the collegiate Gothic architectural style. Aside from the board's general statement back in 1922 that any new university building should have an architectural style that would be inspiring future students and Toledoans, there was really no requirement that the new campus be anything more than the simple and utilitarian campus as had been the case with the previous University of Toledo buildings. But President Dorman spent much of the summer of 1929 touring other college campuses to investigate what features might be incorporated into the new buildings. It clearly embraced a vision that reflected the style of the country's elite institutions, a vision far from utilitarian. When the architectural plans for the university were revealed in August, the public was impressed. The Toledo Times ran an article with drawings of the proposed campus and a multi-page spread with headlines that read, "Toledo's University, beautiful collegiate Gothic architecture for a new university," and "A classic tower will overlook the beautiful yet compact and efficient cluster of buildings soon to rise on Bancroft Street in artistic setting rolling hills." The general type of architecture is collegiate Gothic, the most flexible type of construction and one of the most beautiful as well as practical forms, the article said. Making the connection between the architecture and its historical roots, it went on to state, quote, "With its classic tower in the center and the broad sloping roofed wings on either side, the central building as pictured represents dignity and symmetry, harkening back to the English tradition, to the peacefully studious influence of Oxford and Cambridge, where education has become a fine art," unquote. The tower was to be 6 stories tall with room for a belfry and chimes as well as a clock. The plans showed an indoor field house and outdoor athletic space, as well as parking for about 500 vehicles. March 3rd, 1930 was a cold, snowy day, and the field where the groundbreaking for the new campus was to take place was deep with mud. Classes were dismissed so students could attend, along with numerous city dignitaries. Local newspapers noted that while the ceremony was simple and brief, it was significant beyond the humble act of turning a spade of earth. Construction advanced rapidly, with many Toledoans happy to be part of the project and to have a job as the economic depression continued to worsen. Within 3 short months after the groundbreaking, the cornerstone was laid in place during a ceremony on June 12th that coincided with the commencement ceremony for the class of 1930. Dorman selected the items that would be sealed into the box that was placed into the cornerstone. As construction proceeded on the new campus, some Toledoans argued that the architecture was too extravagant, given the economic difficulties of the time. In January 1931, as construction wrapped up, Dorman was forced to answer criticism leveled at the new building in an address entitled "A New University," which was broadcast over WSPD radio. In particular, the ornamentation of the tower on the main building and its construction out of stone rather than cheaper brick was seen as wastes of taxpayer funds at a time when they could not afford to be wasted. Dorman pointed out in his address that the economic depression had actually worked to the advantage of the bottom line because costs had plummeted since the project had gotten underway. The stone that was used was $100,000 less than brick was expected to cost in 1929. And the tower had added just $75,000 to the total cost, an addition that Dorman clearly believed was worth it. He emphasized that there was no relationship between the cost of a building and its beauty, and the excellence in building design was a product of good architecture, not price. Dorman made his most stirring remarks to the University of Toledo students, both present and future. Quote, "We believe that you are going to respond to the challenge of a beautiful environment, that the traditions which have grown up about this noble architecture will stimulate you to greater effort in learning and to finer decorum, and to a deeper resolve to use your education to further truth, justice, and beauty. This is our faith in you," unquote. It took 400 men, including only a few skilled tradesmen who had to be brought in from outside Toledo, just 11 months to build University Hall in the field house. The exterior stonework was impressive, particularly on the 205-foot tower, with a large gargoyle flanking each corner. A beautiful auditorium that could seat 800 was at the center of the building. The directors approved spending nearly $3,000 for a bronze clock to be placed on the tower. When completed, University Hall had 337 rooms, including 64 classrooms, 50 laboratories, 60 offices, vaults, and a library. There was enough room for 2,000 full-time day students and 4,000 part-time evening students. The main entrance was through a portico with a door on each side that led directly into the president's and vice president's offices. The library in the 5th floor was furnished with massive walnut tables with carved legs that reflected the architecture. The field house could also be used for convocations and commencements. The last day of classes on the old campus was January 29, 1931, with the first day of classes on the new campus scheduled for February. Between those dates, all of the equipment and furniture and records and library books and laboratory equipment had to be moved out of the old buildings and into the new. Over 5 days in the middle of February, President Dorman hosted an open house so the Toledoans could come to see their new university. Some 60,000 of them took him up on his offer. So many people came that everyone could be accommodated. The new university was one bright spot for Toledo that year. As the Great Depression deepened and banks closed and factories shut down and people stood in lines for food handouts, the beautiful new campus on Bancroft Street provided some hope that the future of the city would be better than the present. Unfortunately, Dr. Dorman would not live to see that future, as he tragically died in 1932, the year after the campus opened. The Bancroft Street campus was indeed a miracle. The University of Toledo, founded back in 1872 as a dream of Jessup Scott, had survived against all odds. It had been housed in a church, a building attached to Toledo's high school, a condemned elementary school, a defunct medical college's building, an office building, and a dormitory and industrial building left over from World War I. The buildings on Bancroft Street, with their architecture that harkened back to the great universities of Europe, were remarkable not only for their beauty, but also for their symbolism of permanence. The University of Toledo was no longer an institution that seemed on the verge of folding or a source of embarrassment for the citizens of Toledo. It was instead a real university and one with a future. Okay.
All right, thank you for that great presentation. I think probably been countless number of times walk through those buildings or by those buildings and always wondered the full history behind it. We're grateful for you and coming and telling us all about that. At this time, if you guys have any questions, feel free to keep sending those in the chat. We do have some that have come in already. Okay. So, Barbara, you have a few minutes here.
Absolutely. I'm sorry for the screw up, everybody, at the beginning. My PowerPoint suddenly vanished from my screen, so but glad we were able to fix that.
Not a problem. I think with everyone working virtually, I think we've all had our share of virtual
Moments of terror.
Exactly. We've all been there, some of us more than once, so it's not a problem. So one of the first questions that come in, it was regarding Frank Scott, and it was, what role do you think Frank Scott had in planning the university? I've always thought that the essay, Places for the People, had a lot of influence on his father.
I think Frank Scott of Jessup's three sons was the most influential on his father. He had studied in Europe, he had studied architecture, he studied landscape architecture. He wrote many books on landscape architecture and was a student of Dowling, one of the people who sort of, shaped the way landscape architecture looked in the 20th century. So I think that he was probably the most influential. He was also the most involved in the university. And I think there probably would not have been a University of Toledo had it not been for Frank taking up the cause of his father and really pushing it forward.
Now, going back to some of the early slides you went through, we had a couple questions regarding the name Toledo. Where did that originate from?
That's a darn good question that nobody really knows the answer to for sure. What is believed is that at that time, there was a great interest in popular culture in all things Spanish. And so people were kind of into Spanish culture. And somebody decided that there weren't any other cities named, aside from the one in Spain, named Toledo. And it had a nice ring to it. It was easy to pronounce. And so that became the name. It's not quite sure how and who, but it was largely because of that connection to Spain. And what's interesting is that because it was named after the Spanish city, Toledo, Spain, and Toledo, Ohio became the first sister city association in the entire world in the 1930s.
Thank you for that. Now, I know many times when a historian or researcher tends to begin a study of a particular topic or time period, they tend to go in with some kind of preconceived ideas, thinking once I get, knee deep into this research, this hypothesis, this thesis is more or less going to be supported. But then in many cases, when they start the research, new things come to the front, and they realize that not that they're wrong, but things are very different than when they first started the research process. Was there anything like that for this time period that when you really dove into the research, you're like, wow, I was not expecting that, or it really kind of changed your mindset of that time period?
I guess the thing that struck me is that I always kind of assumed that when the Bancroft Street campus was built in the style in which it was built, that was something well planned and well thought out, and thought about for a long time. But without Henry Durman, I really believe that the University of Toledo would have looked very different. And I firmly believe that the way the university looked in 1931 was incredibly important to the future of the institution, because it was just, it looks you can drive by it a million times and you will say, if anybody drove by it, that's a university, because that's exactly what it was designed to look like. And finally, after all of these years, there was a building for the university that looked like what it was intended to be. And I think that was probably the most important decision in the university's history, because if it hadn't looked like that, and if they hadn't succeeded in doing it, I think the whole university would have been, like a community college or, a public high school. I think that look set everything in place that followed.
It's interesting in going to alumni events, the number of alumni that have commented, especially from outside the area, that went to the University of Toledo, they visited, they saw those buildings, and there's just something about the place that attracted them to it. So definitely it was a good move on his part. The number of students that have attended because of those buildings, I'm sure, is quite numerous.
Absolutely.
Do you think, and this is another question that came in, and They said, we've all been to universities where the architecture is not as nice, or maybe it's slightly more industrial. Do you think make sure I read this properly, do you think maybe the less than stellar building situations prior to the building of this campus contributed to the sort of the overcorrection with such a great and beautiful campus?
Absolutely. And I think the major issue here was the sense of permanence. All of the other buildings had been built for something else. They had been intended for some other purpose. But that building a university that looked like a university with that massive stone structure that said, we're here and we're going to be here forever. And I think that really sense of permanence that those buildings emanate from those buildings is really hugely important to where we are today with the university. And I have to say, this spring, when everybody was gone from campus, and I would walk over to campus every day, my husband and I would walk over and we'd walk around the campus, and it was very sad. And you looked out at the campus, and I remember going up to the steps of the glass bowl and looking out over the whole campus. And I said to myself, Henry Durman, you did absolutely the right thing. You were ingenious in what you did, and I have to think you were probably one of the most important leaders of our institution because of what you did with this structure, this campus. And so I think we all owe him a great debt of gratitude for his vision for what we could become, because it was so different from what we had been.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what a find too at the University of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with UT being an arts center, what sort of influence did the university have? Could you find any sort of evidence or research on the current art museum? Was there a connection between the university and the art museum?
Well, the only real connection is through the founder, Edward Drummond Libby's wife, who was Florence Scott Libby, and her grandfather was Jessup Scott. So she had long ties to the city, and she had a connection to the university. And while they developed as separate entities, I certainly think that connection and the connection back to Jessup Scott, one of the original founders, not only of the university, but of the city, really gave Florence Scott the sense of obligation to the city. And I think she was the force behind the art museum, and she was the one who really, pushed her husband to found the art museum. So I think that we're fortunate to have that connection from her as well.
Now we have a few questions regarding some of the buildings. You showed that last picture of 1938.
Yeah, that's a great picture.
We have some eagle-eye viewers, and so a few questions about that. Some people noticed that Scott and Tucker were in the last image. Yes. Were they built at the same time as University Hall?
They were built right after, in the late 1930s. They were built with federal money through the President Roosevelt's New Deal program. And I think what's interesting about those three buildings is that they were built in the same style as University Hall, as we all can see. And I think that's significant because it set us on the path that every building thereafter needed to incorporate that similar architecture. And there's no other, it's rare to find a university where the architectural style continued throughout the entire development. So I think that's really important. And as I say, they were built with WPA funds from the New Deal.
Is that the same with the Glass Bowl and Libby Hall as well? I noticed those in that picture.
Yes. Yes, Libby was one of those, the three, Libby, Scott, and Tucker, and then the Glass Bowl, all were built with federal funds during the Depression, and they kept people employed during those times.
We had a question from one of the attendees. Do you know just a general ballpark of how many people the WPA employed through their projects on the University of Toledo Bancroft campus?
I would say at least several hundred, and I say that because when they built the glass bowl, they built it all with pitchforks and shovels and hose, and they did that so that they could keep as many people employed as long as possible. And President Nash, who was president then, was so frustrated by how long it took to build that glass bowl, which was then just called the stadium. And I think that's indicative. You know, the WPA was not just a project to build infrastructure, as we would say today, but it was also intended to be a way of keeping people employed and off the streets and being able to feed themselves and their families. So at least several hundred, and I think there was like 200 and some who worked on the glass bowl alone.
Now, anyone that's familiar with the Toledo public school system know that Jessup Scott High School is probably one of the nice little jewels that we have left of the old school buildings. Is there any connection between Jessup Scott and that school or that building in the University of Toledo?
No, I think just I think the connection was just that Jessup Scott had such a profound impact on the founding of Toledo, and he may have owned that land. I say that because he owned so much land. There are old maps in Toledo that show from one side to another just a constant connection of land, all owned by Scott. I mean, he was a major real estate speculator, and it may be that he had originally owned that land. I don't know, but I think it was just because he was so important to the city and its development.
Now, some of the attendees have pointed out they thought it was interesting that at one point there was the medical college, and then they quietly closed it, and then it kind of came back later. Was there really any connection between the university and the other medical colleges or the medical profession at any time before the founding of MCO or the merger of MCO or MUO?
No, after the only connection really is that after the medical college closed in 1914 or 1917, I can't remember what it was, there was this bit of money that was left over. And so it was invested. And by the time the new medical college was built in the 1960s, there was about $50,000 in that fund. And the university then was able to give it to the medical college to help with the development. Now, what you may not know is that the medical college and the University of Toledo were actually supposed to be from the beginning one institution. But due to some political issues and finagling, they became separate institutions at the time of the medical college's creation. But that's an interesting story unto itself.
Sounds like another story for another day.
Story.
We could probably do this probably for a couple more hours, but in respect of your time, we'll slowly wrap things up here. Now, Barbara, you said you're in the process of writing another book. Would you mind telling us, giving us a sneak peek as to what that's going to be about?
Well, it's an in-depth scholarly history of the university. You might remember the first one that was done for the centennial was called The Tower Builders. This is kind of a redo of the Tower Builders. I'm attempting to build it a little differently in that I want to focus on a lot of the people of the university. I want to delve into issues of more current times, like what happened during the 1960s on the campus, and then take it up to present day, take the history up, because that history ended in 1972. So take it up to current day. So I'm really just delving into all of the archives, the presidential papers, the collegians, and a lot of other things, board of directors minutes, and that's where this amazing story of which I didn't realize before, of how this Bancroft Street campus developed, it came out to me in my research. So I'm excited about it.
Well, we're definitely excited that you were able to share what you learned today with us, and we're very grateful for you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us here tonight. I know it's probably only a small part of your vast knowledge, so we look forward to that book and look forward to hearing more about it at a future date. Now, I also want to thank, besides thanking you, Barbara, for your time tonight, I want to thank all of you, the attendees, for attending tonight, asking questions, and being such a great audience. We have nearly 200 of you watching. Also want to thank all of you who are watching this after the fact. Yes, we are recording this program, and we'll send out a link to the recording probably either tomorrow or maybe on Monday. You also can find this and all recorded alumni programs at toledoalumni.org on the video on demand page. Also, as a thank you for tonight's attendees, we will be giving away a few free copies of Barbara's latest book, The University of Toledo, A Campus History. So for those of you that stayed with us to the end, we'll be doing a drawing tomorrow, and we'll be contacting those lucky individuals then. Now, shifting back to the alumni office and toledoalumni.org, if you are interested in attending other alumni events, virtual or when we finally get back to that point when we can do in-person events, feel free to visit toledoalumni.org to see upcoming alumni events. We also would love to have you as a member of the Toledo Alumni Association. If you're not a member, feel free to visit toledoalumni.org, click on membership, and join today. That officially wraps up tonight's program. Thanks again to Barbara Floyd and for this great presentation. We hope you enjoyed your evening, and we hope you have a great weekend. Good night, everyone.